while our focus has evolved over the decades, the mission of having energy work for New Yorkers, benefit New Yorkers, and making that energy as reliable and affordable as possible has not wavered. And so the challenges as we look towards the future really do intersect very closely with this conversation on resilience, right? Our climate is getting hotter. There's more moisture in the air. And so that is leading to both extreme weather events, but then it's also just making the job of operating buildings harder.
Hello, and welcome to this special episode of the REIT Report, part of our 2025 Building Resilience series, which covers ways in which the commercial real estate industry is building resilience by focusing on investing for the long term. This episode is part of our second series discussing how capital investments in buildings and infrastructure address the increasing physical risk facing building owners and communities across the country, and how REITs are part of the solution, driving opportunities for economic growth today and in the future. I'm Jessica Long, Nareit's Senior Vice President for Environmental Stewardship and Sustainability. During our first series, we unpacked how buildings and building owners assess climate-related risks and identify opportunities to improve the resilience of buildings and communities in the face of increasing frequency and severity of natural disasters. In the last two episodes, we discussed the process for implementing physical risk assessments and connecting the lessons learned from efforts over the past several decades to invest in building improvements that boost efficiency and improve indoor environments. While the conversation undoubtedly continues to change, there is increasing consensus on the need for resilience, and challenges remain with quantifying the financial benefits and taking resilience improvement projects from initial risk assessment to designed and planned investment projects. Today, I'm excited to have Michael Reed, Director of Building Transformation at the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority, known as NYSERDA, an organization that promotes energy efficiency and the use of renewable energy sources with the goal of less polluting and a more reliable, affordable energy system for all New Yorkers. Michael has worked for over 8 years in the commercial building sector at NYSERDA and now oversees the building transformation portfolio. Prior to joining NYSERDA, Michael worked at Groundswell, where he led the design and launch of the organization's community solar program and supported residents and communities in negotiating lower costs and high-quality products from clean energy solution providers. Welcome, Michael. I'm so excited to have you here today.
Thanks for having me, Jessica.
So I thought that it would help to just start out with giving us a little bit of background on NYSERDA. I saw that the organization is celebrating its 50th anniversary. Can you share a little bit about how the organization's mission, how it's evolved over the years, and the relationship with the commercial real estate industry?
Thanks a lot for that question. So the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority, or NYSERDA, as you mentioned, we're celebrating our 50th anniversary this year. And we were actually originally started as the state's atomic energy agency back in the 70s, when that was the focus of a lot of policy and policymaking. Over the decades, we have evolved. And at present, our focus is really on catalyzing the clean energy transition while also making the clean energy transition materially benefit all New Yorkers. And so while our focus has evolved over the decades, the mission of having energy work for New Yorkers, benefit New Yorkers, and making that energy as reliable and affordable as possible has not wavered. And so the challenges as we look towards the future really do intersect very closely with this conversation on resilience, right? Our climate in New York and across the world is getting hotter. There's more moisture in the air. And so that is leading to both extreme weather events, which your guests on this series have spoken to very eloquently, but then it's also just making the job of operating buildings harder on the building operators, on the building owners, and on the occupants.
That is so interesting. And I didn't know about the kind of origination of the organization as the nuclear authority. And I keep talking about things coming full circle. And really that's right back up in the headlines now as a potential source of clean energy in this journey that we're on towards transition of our energy sources to clean, abundant, affordable. And I think all of those words just we can't repeat enough as we talk about the work that we do in this space and the interconnection between the built environment and the grid and energy infrastructure in our country.
Yeah, no, that's really true. Couldn't agree more.
Yeah, and I just wanted to dig in more, as you mentioned, that on this connection with resilience. Can you share a little bit about what has led to a focus on resilience and what areas are you really thinking on from your perspective that are most important to boost resilience of the energy systems in New York?
So NYSERDA plays a few different roles on this topic. As the state's energy office, we have a whole group that's focused on supporting New York State in understanding what the future of our energy system is going to look like, identify and proactively address the risks associated with maintaining a safe, reliable, and affordable set of energy systems, and just supporting the state across all of the different functions associated with achieving those goals. And so we, for example, have a whole group that does peer reviewed environmental research and contributes to the underlying science through what we call the climate impacts assessment. So this is research that assesses how climate change will affect New York's communities, ecosystems, and economy. So that's one example of a role that we play with the resilience conversation. Another example is that NYSERDA, alongside the investor-owned utilities such as Con Edison and National Grid here in New York State, administers energy efficiency programs. So we have funds that are overseen by the Public Service Commission and the Department of Public Service. And then we run energy efficiency programs. So that is, you mentioned in the outset that I have worked in the commercial building space for NYSERDA for the last 8 years. That is what has created those relationships with both many of your members and the broader New York City commercial real estate industry. We design and operate programs intended to support private investment in energy efficiency, electrification, and demand flexibility. And we're really focused on helping to develop and promulgate models of how this private investment should drive decarbonization, improved asset financial health, and resiliency. And so I can talk about some of the programs we run, but resilience is intricate to the broader decarbonization undertakings that many of our private sector partners are exploring. So a great example of this is when you have a large asset, let's say a commercial office building, that is either having a major tenant turnover or looking to reposition itself. That entity often comes to NYSERDA to receive technical assistance support, right? We'll provide a cost share, and then they will have their MEP engineer do a full analysis of that building, identify a variety of energy conservation measures, maybe put different packages together. And if they're doing it right, they'll be comparing and contrasting multiple approaches to upgrading their buildings, whether that's the facade or the mechanical system, and planning for the life of that investment, which 10, 20, 30, 50 years. And a lot of the decarbonization approaches that these groups are identifying and vetting and to some extent implementing are also measures that improve the resiliency of that building and improve the building's resilience to the warmer and more moist climate that they're going to have to operate in for the foreseeable future.
That's amazing. And I think that a lot of folks in the real estate sustainability world found some of the on ramp to getting some of this work done has always been working with the utilities and using these programs that help get these projects over the hump. And I love that you brought up the technical assistance being a part of it, because I think a lot of times when they think about these programs, they're thinking more, oh, a rebate after the fact or something like that, when really the challenge is in this upfront work of assessing all of the options, doing that analysis of what's going to be the most best beneficial over the life cycle of the event. And a lot of times it's those soft costs, those engineering costs that might stop a project in its tracks before it even gets started.
And just to say a little bit more about that, Jessica, because you have it absolutely right. It really is how much you put into it at the outset really correlates strongly to how successful the project is at the end of its implementation. And one of the great advantages of working with commercial real estate is that these are actors that tend to have sophisticated internal teams. So I would want to make 3 points here. The first is that NYSERDA learns a lot by partnering with these entities as they are developing their plans. The second is our mission is to serve the entire state. And many of the buildings that we work with and that we're concerned about don't have that level of sophistication that a Nareit member has. And so we're able to glean these lessons from working with these sorts of partners and translate them to our broader array of programs aimed at serving all of New York's buildings. And often the resources or work that is being put in on these early demonstration projects helps to reduce the cost or avoid some of the mistakes that can be made in a project as we look to scale this out to the whole of the built environment.
I think that's a great point. And I think when you think about the big picture goals to decarbonize and build resilience across the built environment, we do know that there's so many building owners out there that don't have the resources of a large REIT or a large private equity building owner. But we know that a lot of this work and these lessons learned have evolved over the years, and there's no need to repeat work that's already been done. And I think that's one thing that I find really exciting about where we are and our members that have worked with you to publish their work. And really, we had Dana Schneider from Empire State on the podcast last year talking about the work that they published with their energy audits and decarbonization plans. And I just think that now the ability to bring everybody else along, smaller building owners with those early lessons learned, but then also support the more sophisticated building owners that have said, I've done that low hanging fruit. Now I need to get the next level of work done, and making sure that the resources are there to keep that momentum going and continue that work.
And a great example of this, let's make this tangible, right? New York City is relatively unique in North America in terms of our existing building stock, right? We have a lot of big buildings. And in particular, we have a lot of big multifamily residential buildings, right? If you go throughout the rest of the country, you're not going to find a 32-story multifamily residential high rise. And you'll find a lot of those here. And they were all built with climate models of the 40s or 50s or 70s, and it's gotten a lot warmer. And so a great example of this is NYSERDA worked closely with the New York City Housing Authority, NYCHA, to aggregate NYCHA's portfolio and say, hey, it's getting hotter and we've got these decarbonization goals. Can a manufacturer build a window heat pump that just fits on the sill depth of our apartments and can be a plug-in solution? And that does two things, right? That helps to significantly simplify the decarbonization process for NYCHA and its buildings. And it also provides a better and more energy efficient source of cooling to all of their residents. And that is a solution that is broadly applicable across the New York City building stock and relevant to this resilience conversation, because I think one thing that we should expect to see in the future is that cooling will become a bigger and bigger priority vis-a-vis policy or regulation. So in New York City, the city council is even considering legislation that would mandate cooling in rental apartments. So that's a great example of the nexus between resiliency, decarbonization, and innovation.
It makes me think about, in my experience over the years, having these conversations, that really difference, that vast regional difference, where you have some areas of the country that it was not typical to have air conditioning in buildings that are now seeing this increase in heat and humidity, where that's a major change and potentially a major investment that needs to be made. And again, going from that voluntary, we've done the climate risk assessment, we think that this is where the market is going, to potentially a mandate from a city to include that, and the conflicting nature that we're seeing in a lot of these cities, where increased comfort and resilience and health priorities are then coming up against the decarbonization and energy goals that sit side by side.
And that's why energy efficiency plays such an important role, right? Because energy efficiency delivers benefits within the four walls of the building, but then it also delivers significant benefits to the energy system more broadly, right? When we are reducing the load of a given end use or space, we are both reducing the total cost of energy to that occupant, but we're also reducing or hopefully smoothing out how much total energy is required from the power system at any given point in time. And, the name of the game right now with our grid, especially down here in New York City, Zone J of the NYSO, is those 100 hours in the summer when everybody's still at work, but a lot of people are at home and everybody's turned on their AC and it's spiking the grid. And so the opportunities, and Con Edison does a great job of administering its grid. We have a very reliable electric system down here in New York City, but also these demand response programs that are administered and the potential for even more demand response from air conditioning units as well as other energy consuming systems in the building really can help reduce the cost of this energy transition overall as we increase the penetration of renewable energy resources into our electric system.
Yeah, I think that connection between energy efficiency in the built environment and the resilience of the grid cannot be overstated enough. It's a key area that we've really been focused on in our conversations. Again, not only about resilience, but about the pathways to decarbonize the built environment and the realities of the growing demand for power and the aspirations and goals that are out there to have that transition to 100% clean energy and having the ability to do that affordably, and all of these things layering on top of each other. And the more that the real estate community and the energy community are working together, the more likely we are going to reach that desired outcome. You mentioned demand response. Again, that was probably a lot of sustainability leaders, a program that we all got involved in early on, and really remains, I think, a key important part of that conversation and that coordination. And I don't hear as much about it. I don't know if that's just because it's been out there for a while and it's not the new shiny thing, but I do think that those programs continue to be really a part of the journey.
Critical. They're really critical. And I think that and we see this in other markets as well, California and Texas being top of mind, where during these extreme heat conditions, state or utility operators will public calls for voluntary demand response or voluntary mitigation of consumption in order to help the system serve the total load and not go down. And I think, that you're right. Demand response programs maybe aren't top of mind until they are, and then they play a really critical role. I also think that increasingly building owner operators are growing more sophisticated, both in terms of the technology that they're deploying around their building management system, but also just from learning from others. This idea of like optimal stop start during the summer. When do you try to turn on your critical conditioning systems to try and avoid the coincident peaks of consumption and let that system float during the middle of the day, temps rise a little bit and then turn it on in the afternoon again. So like pre-cooling, there's a lot of sophisticated strategies that the Nareit members and their peers are currently deploying that don't even get them compensated from a demand response program, maybe help the building manage its individual peak, but it's also just being a good grid citizen, which is something that a lot of these members think a lot about because at the end of the day, they understand they're bearing a significant cost of this system as some of the largest energy users in a given area.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I'm so proud of the community that to be a part of this commercial real estate sustainability community that really does pride ourselves on getting in there and finding the right things to do, even where there might not be an obvious reward. But you know that, it's those small incremental changes that are building towards the bigger picture. And that idea of avoiding that peak demand, it really goes to a little bit of the idea of avoided costs. And we
Right.
don't always get credit for that. And that's what I think we're seeing a lot in the resilience space, where the payback is coming from the damage that you don't see in the future natural disaster. And it's very hard to quantify those benefits in the underwriting of a building.
I couldn't have said it better myself.
We've been talking a lot about partnering with the building community, building resilience, this connection between energy efficiency and supporting grid resilience. You mentioned the kind of tenant turnover as being a point in time that you're seeing a lot of commercial building owners come and look for that assistance. And I think this flagged for me another key thing that has come up in our previous conversations is alignment with the building's capital cycle. And so finding those moments where a project is happening, let's make sure we're getting in and making the best possible decision for the long-term outcome. So can you share a little bit about what are some of the types of projects that you're seeing that are really moving forward and seeing great success with in the built environment that are again, contributing to this energy efficiency, grid resilience intersection?
Well, I think splitting this into a few different segments of the market. On the new construction side, we're seeing incredible progress. A lot of the new construction that comes online in New York is downstate New York City or New York City adjacent multifamily residential. And so the community within the new construction space has made tremendous progress both in designing and delivering high performance all electric buildings that meet or surpass any type of code and that also have relatively low operational costs. And a big part of that is that the facades or the envelopes that are being designed and built really reduce total energy demand and consumption. And so it's a less leaky building. Now, that does require then better ventilation, better mechanical ventilation. One aspect of resilience that we haven't talked about is there's more wildfires happening. And while those wildfires may not be happening within New York State's boundaries, the air doesn't care about that. If it's a fire up in Canada like what we have today, it really does lead to pretty poor air quality in New York City. That's a long way of saying that in the new construction space, there's really good advances being made and a lot of sophistication and emphasizing that like passive house standard envelopes are becoming more and more common, but then also different forms of mechanical ventilation. When we move from new construction to existing buildings and talk about retrofits, I think the story there is a little less clear. And what we are seeing is a lot of opportunistic retrofits. So that is, as you mentioned, aligned with a major capital event, whether that's a tenant turning over, the end of useful life of a major, the chiller is reaching the end of its useful life, or some type of major energy producing or consuming equipment. And so, in the sense of opportunistic, what I mean when I say that is, okay, we got to do this anyway. We got to replace the chiller. What are our opportunities to optimize or partially decarbonize as we are replacing this piece of key equipment? And we're seeing a lot of innovation on that front. And in general, I would say that the community divides around central solutions or decentralized solutions. So a lot of the Nareit members are running pretty big buildings with a lot of central systems. But even within those big buildings with the central systems, what you're seeing is tenants or others choose decentralized systems to supplement or augment what might be provided by the base building. And that's much more common on the multifamily front, where you're seeing a lot of packaged heat pumps being designed and installed both in new construction and existing buildings, and it provides the benefit of additional cooling. On the commercial side, the opportunity to move to lower temperatures to distribute hot or cold water also then allows for heat recovery to happen, right? A lot of commercial buildings were designed with linear systems in place. The cooling was one system, the heating was another system, and the two didn't mix. And so that leads to a decent amount of simultaneous heating and cooling. That intuitively doesn't make great sense in this world in which heat becomes more expensive and more valuable. And so increasingly, actors are looking at what are the opportunities, whether it's air side or water side, to capture waste heat and reutilize it. And that's where a central system that's moving low temperature water through pipes presents a great opportunity, a great medium to put that waste heat that's recovered and make it go to work. And that both reduces the total energy that needs to go into the building, and it's just more efficient from a resource deployment perspective.
It's amazing talking about some of the work that happened. And I always refer to buildings as these living, breathing things because they really are. And I think it's so important when we have the conversations, like I said, about making capital improvements in the building, that we're moving beyond the facts and figures on the spreadsheet. We're really understanding how the building works and potentially unintended consequences. This idea of simultaneously heating and cooling, we've been talking about that for a long time. And every time we do, to me, it's one of those things that when somebody hears it, it's the obvious, that doesn't make sense. Why would we be doing that? But it's been happening in buildings across the country for a long time.
And a great example of an actual project that's happening that captures what we're talking about here, Rockefeller Center, so Tishman Speyer's Rock Center, is working with Con Edison to look at how they can utilize waste heat coming from their campus and use it within a thermal energy network pilot. And that's really exciting because I think in particular, when you look at Manhattan, really diverse and dense part of our built environment with lots of different load profiles, and capturing waste heat here and moving it over here is such a elegant and relatively low cost solution. Now, of course, you got to build the infrastructure to move that heat from one place to another, and that's not low cost. But in terms of providing energy sources that don't require a significant capital investment, waste heat is such a no-brainer on that front.
I totally agree. And I think even in the world where we're searching for abundant sources of renewable energy, the term waste heat, it's like we should be doing something with that. And there's got to be a way to harness that heat and use it in a way that we're using heat derived from all kinds of sources.
And it's 2025, and we've made it 30 minutes into a podcast about energy without saying data centers. So congratulations to us, but that's obviously a huge source of waste heat. And according to many different people, an enormous growth opportunity.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. I almost slipped in the data centers when we were talking about the need for abundant energy and demand response. Definitely, it was in the back of my mind, but it's truly such an important part of the conversation that can't be ignored, right? No one is turning off all of their devices and gadgets. We're only becoming more connected, and we're only going to need those data centers and that energy powering those systems even more.
Totally agree.
So let's see, we've covered a lot already. We've talked about extreme heat. I think that here we are. This is our summer 2025 series, and it couldn't have been more relevant. I was just talking to my husband right before we started recording about the humidity and the difference in that feel of heat versus heat plus humidity. And just again, what are you seeing and how is that conversation unfolding with the grid operators and the energy suppliers and then with building owners, and how can we continue to bring that conversation together?
Well, it's a great question. So, first of all, I do want to say that NYSERDA co-led with our Department of Environmental Conservation, the state's first extreme heat action plan, and that was specifically to address the threat and reality of extreme heat. And we see this in all over the state. So it's not just New York City. This is a statewide phenomenon. And so we released that extreme heat action plan last year. And then since then, the state has really worked to develop or enhance resources to help protect communities and help folks plan and implement cooling projects. One area or one part of the built environment where this really takes center stage is schools, right? When we think about kids, I think about suffering through last week's heat wave with my two children and how miserable they were, and to say nothing of these poor teachers who are trying to teach kids when it's extremely hot outside. Increasingly looking to design guidelines so that when a school is getting renovated, it's putting in the cooling that is needed to help make sure we create a great learning environment. But then also, schools are centers of community. And so when the school isn't in session, increasingly schools can then serve as cooling centers. And that's a critical function, especially in urban environments. You get this heat island effect. And so, particularly vulnerable populations need a place to go to get cool. There's more and more cooling centers. And New York City is doing a lot of good work on this front. And I'm just making the point there that I was listening to one of your other podcast guests on this topic who was talking about 5 or 6 different wins, because when you think about resilience and you look at all the stakeholders who can benefit from resilience investments, you see such a 6x to every dollar that's spent, it returns $6 of benefits to society. I think that's another great example, right? Putting cooling in schools makes up for a much better learning environment for those students. If the cooling system is energy efficient, it can help reduce the total demand that building is pulling from the grid. And then it can also serve as a cooling center for nearby residents who may be particularly vulnerable to those extreme heat. So that's like a win-win, and a great example of how we're seeing different stakeholders come together, talk about capital improvements that are happening in their community, and figure out how those capital improvements can then also benefit the broader community. We need to see that even more and at a larger scale. But I think we're seeing really good progress, and that is being led by local authorities that have the jurisdiction.
I really love that example. I'm here in Montgomery County, Maryland, outside of DC. I've been connected with the Great Green Schools group here. There's been a lot of great work that's been done. And I think the idea that through public buildings like schools and libraries and other public buildings, we're all on the same grid. The electrons don't care who owns the building, but the training and the experience for the local building community, right? The contractors that are working on those projects are also working on commercial building projects. And there's lessons learned going back to that idea that we are spreading this knowledge across the building, the real estate community, and that is raising the bar across the board to allow those projects to move forward. On our last episode, we really talked about the need for more technical, skilled trades, technical experts to really get all of this work done, and making sure that we are focusing on that next generation of real estate industry leaders and making sure that those skilled trades are part of the conversation as well.
Yeah, no, couldn't agree more. And, NYSERDA, as the state's energy authority, we have a significant workforce development priority, right? This is both how we support job growth and economic development that benefits New York State. We make sure that the future demand for decarbonization solutions has high quality, talented New Yorkers ready to meet that demand. And in particular, on the job training is such a great workforce development tool. And many of our commercial real estate partners participate in those programs with us, right? And benefit from both the training that is provided, but then they also will employ the worker and give them on the job training, which is the most valuable kind of training. And I think that I couldn't agree more. We need more and more of that as we look to a future in which the demand for retrofits, the demand for some of these solutions is likely to increase quite dramatically over the next 10 years.
Totally agree. This has been an amazing conversation. I'll close it out with one final question to you. What areas of research or innovation are you focused on that is really furthering the resilience conversation?
So, one area, thanks for asking and thanks for having me again. It's been a joy to talk about all of this. Natural carbon solutions. So, this is an innovation challenge that we run, and it supports a wide variety of approaches that leverage nature, right, to produce outcomes that are important, whether that's about energy savings or about decarbonization. And the Natural Carbon Solutions Program is supporting 6 innovative green cooling technologies. So that includes modular cooling centers, living building surfaces. That's intuitively cool and nerdy. Novel heat island modeling. So better kind of data and analytics to figure out where that very localized phenomena is happening. Circular economy approaches for urban forestry, enhanced street tree irrigation, and modeling for passive cooling. So those are 6 very specific, very technical natural carbon solution opportunities that we are supporting that connect into this need and increased demand for cooling.
I love that. That is such a great way to wrap up this conversation that really is accessible to everyone and that continue to move the discussion forward around efficiency, cooling, the need for resilience, especially as you mentioned in our urban areas, and solutions that are out there for any building owner to take advantage of.
That's right. And more information can be found by coming to NYSERDA's website.
I really encourage all of our listeners to do just that, to explore the resources that are available out there for building owners and communities that are interested in boosting resilience. I can't thank you enough for coming on today. This has been a great conversation, and I look forward to continuing to see the great work that you're doing with our members and across the New York region.
Thanks a lot for having me, Jessica.
If you enjoyed this discussion and would like to hear more about what's happening across the REIT industry, you can subscribe to the REIT Report or leave a review wherever you access your podcasts. And if you're interested in learning more about REIT sustainability, check out nareit.com/sustainability, where we highlight efforts of the REIT industry to deliver strategic value through sustainability in the built environment.